Thank you for joining us in this webinar about the Unified Commerce Speed of Change. I'm Brad Buhl. I'm joined with Rob Harbols. Wanted to just quickly introduce Rob to you guys. He's a partner at Artisan. Artisan is a Broadleaf partner as well. Rob's got over 20 years of experience. Like me, he's an old guy of leadership in the digital commerce area. Rob has championed digital transformations. He's scaled innovation with overhauls of e-com, point of sale, customer relationship management, or CRM, store operations, supply chain management, digital security. Prior to Artisan, he was the CIO at Buhl, which is where I originally met Rob. And so, Rob, it's really great to be with you today.
Yeah, thanks so much, Brad. A little bit about Mr. Brad Buhl. He and I met back early last decade to jump into the e-commerce conversations, and his mastery of the domain really set him apart from other chief revenue officers. So as the CRO of Broadleaf, it's definitely a pleasure to introduce Brad as someone who's familiar with strategy, product management, and sales. And he's definitely got an awareness of how things work technically, and you can really see him light up when you get to talking about things like microservices. So he definitely knows his audience well.
Appreciate that, Rob. Well, as we get into it, I know we've got kind of a white paper that we both wrote. Really, it was started by you, but let's go ahead and get into kind of what that agenda looks like for us today. We can't start today without talking about what happened in 2020 with COVID and how that affected everybody, good, bad, or indifferent. If you look from there into, hey, what do we do about it now? We talk about kind of the evolution of e-commerce. We then talk about the future in terms of what you should do now. But ultimately, we had a white paper that we wrote. You can download it if you don't already have it at artisan-studios.com/unified-commerce-report or broadleafcommerce.com/unified-commerce-report. So again, this really came out of Rob's brain is where this started. And then we ended up doing a survey around it of the retail industry that we're going to talk about today. So we're going to talk about past, present, and future is what you should get out of this webinar. Let's go ahead and talk about 2020. The U.S. Census Bureau doesn't yet have the fourth quarter in the books, but what we see is, over time, you've got this holiday peak between the third and fourth quarter every year that really COVID doubled. And as horrible as COVID was for so many people, it did spike all of our use in the digital space. So it really did fast forward digital efforts. We do see that retail sales overall in the third quarter of 2020 were reported just below 200 billion. And of that, and that's in the US again, of that, the retail e-commerce sales were reported around 27 billion. So we really do see, again, this fast forwarding of digital efforts.
Yeah, great start, Brad. I think the biggest thing that I think about from the retail industry being on the other side of the numbers and looking at the patterns, the biggest call out here is that this is an anomaly in this pattern, and so you can't be too comfortable relying on the data that you always had to understand what is going on out there. There's been a lot of disruption in the industry. There's a lot of behavior changes. And so I think the biggest thing everybody's watching for as the Q4 numbers come out is, really what is this pattern change? Is it a one-time change? Is it something that's going to shift? I think the consensus, from what I've heard on the street is there's definitely going to be some change, and it's really hard to predict what 2021 and 2022 are going to do.
Yeah, and to that point, the rate that we've seen of change has been dramatic, and there is some stuff that I think we can all say is here to stay. According to Gartner, in the U.S., it took 8 weeks of COVID, 8 weeks, to deliver the e-commerce growth of the previous 12 years in terms of percentage of revenue that comes from an e-commerce channel versus a physical channel. In the UK, it took 12 weeks to deliver the growth of a decade, of 10 years. And so I think just as consumers, we can obviously see, things like contactless delivery, curbside pickup, here the QR codes that are pretty ubiquitous at this point are kind of here to stay. But really, I think the thing that we started seeing in survey results, and as we talk to different executives, particularly in the retail industry, is that people are playing catch up. And there's a lot of, for example, contactless or curbside delivery that's been going on for a decade, right? But all of a sudden, with this event that happened in 2020, you've got a need to catch up with that. And I think that's a general theme, right, that we saw from those that we polled.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just that they weren't already trying to play catch up before the last year, right? I would say a lot of interactions with retailers everywhere. It was, how do we catch up with what other people are doing, and how do we plan ahead and see the future enough to know where to take our teams and our efforts and actually go do something. And I think the responses that we saw in the data here are just that it's even there's even more pressure to keep moving more quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well said. Well, as we get into kind of these different, digital commerce models or the evolution of e-commerce, I'd love, for you, Rob, to kind of describe the process that you went through in our initial discussion of, hey, let's kind of jointly write a white paper.
Yeah, this is definitely, boy, this picture just gets me excited looking at a whiteboard. I tell you, in joining a lot of online conferences about what, the digital commerce space is seeing, early in the COVID shutdowns, when retail was really taking the hardest hit, there was a lot of panic. There was a lot of what's next. And the word unprecedented was used so many times in every digital conference. It drove everybody crazy. So I really wanted to start thinking through, what is so unprecedented about the fact that things are changing constantly? It just didn't seem like a new pattern. It just seemed like it was accelerated. And so, just to throw out on the whiteboard, talking through, single channel commerce. When the company gets started, you start adding different channels like online and email, contact centers, and you start to think about how all the systems in your company have to interact with that. And so what you see in the diagrams on the left of the whiteboard there, we're just talking through, here's all the different types of commerce, from single channel commerce, multi-channel, where you're adding different touch points. And then you get into some of the omnichannel conversations. And as you progress through each of those models, it becomes so much more complex with the different touch points and interactions across the business, and all of the different systems that have to work in harmony to actually craft consumer experiences in a positive way. And when you think about all of the disruption that the last year has had, how are people really targeting the next stage? And a lot of people are talking about what's the next, quote, model that you would have. And in trying to come up with what the next model is, it's clear to me and many others I've been working with, it's not another stage that we need to be targeting. It's not another model that we should be aiming for. What we really should be aiming for is a unified version of how all of these systems work in harmony across the business, rather than thinking through separate channels or separate touch points with consumers. And so, when we start thinking about how do we step back and do this from a statistical perspective, what data can we have in front of us that can help us answer questions about what is the new normal? I hate the terms new normal, because it's nothing new to me in seeing that change is happening constantly. It has been for generations, and in technology, it happens so quickly that the real pattern that started to come out of this discussion on the whiteboard was the acceleration behind brands and companies needing to change quickly is really what's different. It's no longer just, hey, do you have these few features, or are you integrated with these different systems? And when you hear things like, we can't support that experience because of whatever system or organizational hurdle is in the way, you're not thinking unified. And so when we think about unified commerce, all of the infrastructure, the people in the company, the relationship with the consumer all has to be in touch. And that's where we started drawing the wheel there to show we need to focus with the relationship between the consumer and the organization rather than the touch points and the channels. So ultimately, that got us going on defining unified commerce, and the real call out is that the speed that companies have to accelerate change needs to become the focus, or they'll get left behind.
Yeah, and I think as we talk about that phrase unified commerce, I mean, that becomes really important in our survey results, which we'll talk about next. But as we think about this kind of, as we've called it, the evolution of commerce from single to multi to omni-channel, and then ultimately to unified commerce, I think the one word that we've got to just define is brand, right? Because there's an overall, right, customer centricity that I think is talked about a lot in market, but there's also brand management. And so the definition of what brand management means is, I think, worthy of just calling out. Rob, when you think about brand, what do you think about?
So when I think about brand, I think about, especially in retail, the most important part of the models that we have here is the shoppers in the diagram, and the relationship between the shopper and all the different touch points in the organization ultimately add up to what I would consider the brand. And so the shoppers aren't going to look at one organization and think differently about how they interact on their phone, how they interact in their stores or online. They're going to interact with that entire brand, and they're going to think about their relationship with the brand without worry about all the different systems that are involved or the different touch points. And so when I think of brand, it encapsulates all of the parts of the company that would be interfacing and interacting with the customers.
Yeah, so really what I'm hearing is that you're keeping shoppers engaged with your brand rather than keeping them with channels, right? It's the idea of, hey, what's the feeling of, your specific brand, and making sure that that's consistent regardless of channel, not just thinking about, individual channel management, but hey, what do I want to portray as a brand?
Yeah, absolutely. Sense? Yep.
Great. And again, we kind of go through all of this in the white paper, the research report. So, if you are interested, please do download and check that out. I thought it was really interesting to go through some of these, the survey and insights. Just to start with, what we did, we did conduct a survey of over 40 retail e-commerce executives and really IT people as well. It's interesting because I think that it is kind of, it does correlate directly with the range of retail that we see today. And as an example, there is no single channel answer that had over 250 million in GMV and online revenues. There was one answer that had over 100 million. But the split of retail that I think we saw from the people who answered the survey, from your and my network at the end of the day, Rob, from Artisan and Broadleaf's network, I think is a good split of retail today.
Yeah, and I think that it really goes to show that, people are at least familiar with multi-channel and omnichannel features and functions, and we'll see more of that in the next couple slides. But, unified commerce is still a relatively new term. And again, it's definitely one of those questions where I think there's definitely a variety of definitions people are giving something like unified commerce.
Yeah. And to your point, as we get into unified commerce, which I know a lot of times people will conflate omni-channel and unified commerce, the interesting thing from our survey showed that people who said, "Hey, I've got a unified commerce solution," they by far, as the slide says here, had the highest confidence in their organization's ability to keep up with shifting consumer demands. All of them said they support buy online, pick up in store, and curbside pickup. Almost all of them supported buy online, return in store, near real-time in-store inventory online, and unified offers and promos. The thing that was interesting to me was the difference between those respondents that really classified their digital commerce platform as omni-channel, because almost all of them did, offer, again, that buy online, pick up in store, return in store. Ship from store is the other thing, though, that omni-channel respondents answered in a majority that unified commerce did slightly have a majority of as well, but they also talked about curbside pickup and unified offers and promos. So, I thought that was interesting as you think about this kind of endless aisle offer, where you've got kind of third-party shipping, right, or other aspects of, being able to directly order items from your point of sale, whether it be in store or whether it be from a third party. That just was a quick call out between omni-channel versus unified commerce. It seems like the unified commerce respondents, really at the end of the day, they are kind of ahead with regards to brand management and customer engagement on all fronts. I think the question is, how are you doing brand management and customer engagement, as kind of a question to your organization? Do you agree, Rob?
Yeah, absolutely, and it really lays up the question of how many of these do I have to have before I become omni-channel or unified, in general, and there isn't a right answer for every organization. You definitely have to take a look at what matters to you, and of all the people that were unified commerce respondents, they don't necessarily have every feature that's up here, right? And so I think that the most important call out for me is that they were confident that they were able to change quickly, and that they saw that they were unified in nature. And that's really the most important part of the different models and where companies need to be looking forward. They have to make sure that they're going to be able to accommodate the things that aren't even listed here yet, right? And so to be able to categorize yourself in these different types of models, I think it is important to know what the features are that are out there that everybody else has, but not everybody is willing to just follow the cookie cutter, like copycat approach, where you look at what everybody else is doing and try to check those off. Even if your leadership is thinking that you're omnichannel because you've got a couple of these, or that you have unified commerce because it was on the box of the software you bought, it's just not that simple. It really is about gauging your consumer base and understanding what you're providing to them.
Yeah, well said. Well, another interesting thing from our survey is, almost all of those who were highly confident, what you see on the chart, the right side of the chart, with the organization's ability to keep up with consumer shifting demands, almost all of them had ongoing projects with relation to replacing digital commerce related legacy systems. I think that to me starts to point to, hey, this is an ongoing process. It's not a product. And I think shifting organizational expectations around, hey, this is something that we're going to invest in and have an organization around for, a long time to come, is something that I think, needs to happen, because too many times, I think, Rob, you and I have both seen, okay, we've got the project, we're done, move on to the next thing. And then all of a sudden, a year or two later, oh my gosh, we've got to change something dramatically.
Yeah, and you don't always, you're not always able to finish the projects before people want to change them either, right? So, yes, there's ongoing projects, but really this information told me a little bit of what I forecasted on the whiteboards early on, and that's that, there's a lot of change that people already wanted and expected to keep up with consumer demands. And, the last year has been a catalyst and an accelerant for that. And so, the second chart there about confidence level really speaks to the doubt that is plaguing a lot of organizations out there on how confident they are that they can keep up with where they need to take their business to meet the needs of the consumers.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there was one more as we get into kind of what are the roadblocks to organizations and what do you do about it in terms of next steps. There was one more correlation that I think is worthy of noting, and it's the fact that on the left-hand side you see 66%, so 2/3 of our respondents said that prioritization of other projects was the ultimate thing that hindered them from moving to that next step in the commerce journey. By the way, you could have in our survey multiple answers on this, but 2/3 said that it was prioritization of other projects. Well, the highest correlation with that answer was also those that answered, we're using internal staff to do anything around digital commerce. And I think, that to me really points out the fact that, hey, if you're talking about cost cutting or revenue generating initiatives, you might want to look to a third party to come in because, all of your, quote unquote, sunk costs, are in staff who are doing day-to-day jobs. And so you really do, profit at the end of the day from an outside expert coming in and helping you with those initiatives.
Yeah, I think the biggest call out here is that, there's nothing wrong with having other projects prioritized and internal staff doing the work. You can definitely, succeed in what you've got laid out for your roadmap. But if the challenges are coming more quickly and they're becoming larger and you need an accelerant to move forward at, quote, an unprecedented pace that you have not done before, you've got to be willing to look at some outside help, getting some expertise in that has been through the trenches before, and you really need to be able to talk with the leadership about where your priorities stand. And if you want to be able to go faster, something's got to give.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, we're going to open it up for Q&A now. So if you will look on the webinar at the bottom right, you can actually ask the moderator questions, and then Rob and I are looking at those questions in a separate chat channel. So we are going to open it up now for Q&A. We do have a couple of questions queued up. But again, feel free to use that moderation chat service on the bottom right of your browser. First question, what can our organization do to be prepared to keep up with the speed of change? So what can our organization do to be prepared to keep up with the speed of change? Which was really the title of the white paper. I think we covered some of that, Rob, throughout the presentation, in terms of, hey, it's a process, not a product. Understanding that this is something that enables you to have a platform, not a product as well, right? From a commerce perspective.
Right. I think the part that I would add is, as with any major initiative you're looking at for yourself, you've got to take a current assessment of where you stand. When you're looking at the types of features that you have for your consumers, you're feeding all this data to a CRM. What are you doing with it? How are you using that information to turn around and provide value for your consumers? So you've got to make sure not only that you understand what is the current state of where you're at, but where is it that you're trying to get? What is the speed of change that is comfortable for your organization? Maybe your organization is perfectly fine where it's at. and you aren't interested. Well, there's no reason to scramble and try to make more changes. But the evidence that we see is that a lot of people are looking at how to accelerate, and they want to go more quickly. And so what kind of infrastructure components do you have across your enterprise that makes sure you are flexible and capable of integrating quickly and moving the needle on adjustments and changes? What organizational boundaries do you need to overcome? How do you get outside help that you believe can help understand and bring light to some of the problems and how to accelerate? All of these are options, but ultimately you need to figure out what your current state is, where you're going, and then lay out a plan and potentially get some help to figure out how you get there.
Yep, I agree. Next question is, the pandemic isn't over, but won't last forever. So, I think pointing to some of the COVID, history that we talked about, what are the benefits of unified commerce past this point in time? We talked about some of the things that we think are going to, stick around, right? The curbside pickup, the contactless delivery. What are some of the benefits, though, again, past kind of the COVID timeline when we do come out of this pandemic?
Yeah, I think, I like to look at that conversation even not thinking about the pandemic, right? When you don't think about last year, universal commerce was justified in its own right because there was an accelerated expectation to meet consumer needs. Just the types of shopping engagements and the expectation that digital engagements had with even stores, right? All of that was changing before some of these contactless expectations were brought to the table. So I would say that they're almost the same, except you need to think survival instead of surprise and delight. Okay, it's no longer just a nice to have for a lot of these things, and so having a universal commerce framework or infrastructure at the heart of your relationship with your consumer allows you to meet the needs of post-COVID shopping trends and more quickly than before. I think it was just almost fortunate that a lot of retailers were already thinking about some of these anyway and had a good idea of how to accomplish them. And when it really rained on their parade, the whole year flipped upside down. Those were the first features that they pushed to the front of the priority line. So honestly, I don't think it's any different post-COVID other than the acceleration needed to accomplish them. The expectations were that they needed to happen sooner.
Yeah, and really a lot of people playing catch up at the end of the day, but it's not just a process of catch up, it's a process of ongoing, platform development is kind of the phrase that I commonly use. Would you agree, Rob?
Yes, absolutely. You need a platform that can allow you to do that. And that's really why, Brad and I got together to talk about a lot of these problems is, we're very well poised to have further discussions on these, regarding the commerce suite, the Broadleaf suite and the experience that Artisan brings to the table to help overcome these.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, well, I'll take this opportunity to thank everyone for joining. And Brad, it's been a pleasure walking through this. And, we really tried not to get too far into the material that was already in the white paper. So, feel free to visit our websites and take a look at that material. And if you have any further questions, would be happy to take it up offline with an email question or anything like that after the webinar. Absolutely.
You could visit broadleafcommerce.com/contact or email us at info@broadleafcommerce.com. You can also visit artisan-studios.com/contact to reach out to either of us. But thank you guys so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Rob, appreciate you, man. Always good to see you.
Yeah. Thanks, Brad. Appreciate it.
All right. Bye, everybody.